Everybody knows about strip clubs and strippers, but have you ever wanted to delve into what it's like to work in a strip club? Is it a deviant subculture? Are the people that come to strip clubs part of that deviant subculture, or rather is it a microcosm of the larger society? So we're going to talk today with the author of several articles, Melissa Lavin, and it's going to be hosted today by Dr. Beverly Yuen Thompson right here to my left.
Thank you, Akello. It's great to join you from cold Albany, New York, where I'm a sociology professor and I teach a class called Deviant Behavior. And so I love to talk about, deviant subcultures, really talking about stigma and moral panics. And so sex work is something that I really like to talk about my students. And I'm always trying to get them to move away from just this kind of moral panic around sex work that they were raised with. And I really try to orient their thinking process about it into this is an industry, a work labor issue. And so I always focus on the labor aspects of, what is the sex industry? How do workers come into it? How is the industry structured? And so all three of us are sociologists. And so we're going to really focus on those kinds of structures that uphold the system in our society.
And I would say, as a micro level sociologist, I'm really interested in the way in which that dynamic plays out, not only in the strip club, but the way in which gender is performed. And then that whatever happens in the strip club is that kind of behavior taken outside of the strip club. Is this part of, toxic masculinity, if you will?
Well, it's great to have Melissa Lavin with us today, and she is a sociology researcher and ethnographer, but also, really focuses on the concept of symbolic interaction. And so just like you're saying, Akello, she really focuses on her work on this kind of micro interaction between people. So Melissa, if you want to just kind of introduce yourself and, where do you teach? What do you teach? And what kind of research do you do in general?
Yes, so thank you, Beverly, for having me today, Akello. I am an associate professor of sociology in the criminal justice program at State University of New York, College at Oneonta. I am a symbolic interactionist. I am an ethnographer. My original research for my dissertation was on strippers specifically, and I wrote 3 articles out of my dissertation. One in 2013 in Deviant Behavior, one in 2014 in Humanity and Society, and one final one in 2017, again in Deviant Behavior, looking at different aspects of the stripper experience and the strip club experience, emphasizing drugs.
Wanted to ask you just some framing, like some contextual thing, like first of all, like what, time period did you do your work? What geographic part of the country? And so on.
Yeah, so I have worked in and been around strip clubs since 1998 initially, from 1998 to 2001, and then started my graduate degree in 2006, studying strip clubs again from 2006 to 2011 actively, like data collection and analysis going on, really 2006 to 2010 probably. In multiple areas of the country. First, the Mountain West, in a probably upper middle class college town, and then moving over to the post-industrial Northeast in a small city near a college town. So looking at this industry across at least a decade in multiple areas of the country, and quite different kinds of establishments, like in terms of, the workers as well as the clientele, in terms of things like race and class.
So do you want to tell us a little about just the process of getting into this space, making those connections, and then how you organized your work? Was it like observation or interviews, or how did that take place?
Yeah, so initially how I got into the space, like I get into any space, trial by fire. You just, you go in and you fake it till you make it, when in Rome, do as the Romans, and, begin to engage participant observation.
If you could talk about like the ethnographic challenges of being a participant, observer, that's like, you're taking notes and there's a lot of dual identities that are happening. And I think that's different than someone sitting casually observing and taking notes, right? But being immersed in that and then still having to document that, I mean, do you write on the notebook paper? Do you do voice recordings?
Yeah, so this is all very rudimentary, very sort of pre-technological at this point, like in terms of like how I was going about this. So, being in the setting for, at least like 6 to 8 hours at a clip, of course, over time, these experiences imprint and, you sort of get a sense, these things sort of happen the same over and over. But at first I'm doing a lot of like jotting notes on cocktail napkins and like, bathroom stalls and, dressing room areas, jotting notes on napkins and kind of throwing them in a duffel bag. And then, most of the time, having the discipline later, like within 48 hours from, having like, maybe 10 or 12 cocktail napkins, getting them home, organizing them, and then being able to, at that point, expand into, create like, dozens of pages of field notes.
The burning question that I had was, the reason for your research, obviously it's for your dissertation, but ultimately is it about bringing awareness about this space? Is it about advocacy? Is it about vindication? Or is it all of the above?
Well, I'm sure it's some amount. That's a great question. It's some amount of all of the above. But I of course understand that not all ethnographers have to sort of learn what they live and live what they learn. Sometimes folks will approach a particular topic cold and start to, spin ethnographic tales about it. For me, I like ethnography that comes from a place where a researcher has some ordinary or natural familiarity with the people or a setting first, for perhaps years before a formal process ensues, because you do have more perhaps emotional commitment to a setting or a scene, and you're perhaps tired, and I know I was tired of seeing stripper ethnographies, of which there have been many. I mean, the sociology of strip club literature is quite saturated, and of varying quality. I got tired of seeing folks that didn't necessarily have any kind of insider connection to these locales or to these people telling stories about them. So for me, it's about, I guess you could say, quote, setting the record straight. Although at the same time, there's many ways to do that. There's not just one way to set the record straight. But I think it's important to add marginalized voices to the mix, and to come from the inside with that. So to me, it's about activism through accuracy. Like, I want to see that the literature that's out there is correct.
So can you just kind of set up how does the institution operate? Like you mentioned, folks are freelancers, they're independent contractors. Is that just generally the way it works? Like, if they are independent contractors, do they have much control then over their schedule or their work process? Like, how do folks enter the industry? And I would guess also, like, how long do folks stay in the industry? Is it just a few years?
Yeah, so it varies wildly. I mean, some people are in and gone in weeks, and other people are career or lifelong, strippers. You could start as a stripper in some places. You could then spend many years there and then become a bartender over time. Or but it's still pretty transient. It's you can for folks who have employee status, it's a little bit more pinned down. Work shifts. You have particular work shifts. You pay taxes. You get like waitress or waiter wages. Some people don't like to do that because of stigma. Because of the sort of anonymity piece. Like, they don't necessarily want to be like tied in any kind of formal or legal or bureaucratic way, you know, to establishments. I think for managers and owners, they like independent contractors because, of course, it's cheaper for them. At a club, the club that I was familiar with from 2006 to 2011, everybody was just off the books. It was independent contractor work. You know, the quality of clubs varies profoundly, you know, like how they function, like varies profoundly. It's very much like an open, it's an industry that's completely open at the edges. So you know, the disadvantages of not of letting all your workers come and go as they please. You know, some nights you might have no workers. Like if it's a Tuesday afternoon, like nobody wants to work a Tuesday afternoon. You're not going to make any money.
That's what's interesting about your research. I mean, there, like you mentioned, the literature on strip clubs is saturated. There's so much on it, and you mentioned, of course, the areas in which people have written a lot. But what your work really contributes is just how the different hierarchies and narrative devices that the workers use about their own consumption practices. And you focus on the alcohol, which is part of the sales and the business formally, but also just the other drugs that might be consumed. Folks are smoking cigarettes back in the 90s out on the patio. There's also marijuana. And then there's also other types of drugs. And then just the ways in which they say, you know, make a distinction between this is acceptable and this is not, and the reasons why. And so how are, like, of course, alcohol, we could start with that because that's part of the industry. And you're saying that, you know, alcohol sales are a huge, huge part of this industry. And so, you know, the clients are buying their own alcohol. They're also buying it for the dancers. And then the dancers, of course, are able to consume alcohol on the job, which is a different kind of job. So how does
if they're 21 and up, they're supposed to be. At some clubs, like you can be 18 to work, but you have to be 21 to drink. So that, you know, that can get dicey.
Mm-hmm.
And that, you know, that's going to vary a lot in terms of like era and state laws and so on and so forth. But, you know, some workers don't want to drink. They don't want to get like wildly intoxicated. So they'll have a deal with the bartender, you know, to where, you know, they kind of align against the customer. You know, heels are tough to be too drunken, you know. So like if you're gonna, you know, start falling around or fall off the stage or get hurt, or, you know, and people can get quite sloppy, you know, customers and dancers both. But typically, as long as everybody's holding it in, kind of holding their alcohol, nobody seems to care how much anybody drinks. Because again, it's part of the formal economy of the locale. It's part of the bottom line. Some places will pay some attention to that at the end of the night in terms of who's driving home.
I from my experience and observation being in strip clubs, I think it can really bring out the worst in some men, and then you have alcohol on top of it. And I've to be honest with you, I always was morally conflicted being in a strip club. I just wanted to like show respect and tip, but I couldn't help using my sociological imagination to think about like this whole thing and how it's playing out, and how, you know, just the overall, the objectification, you know, of women in that arena, and then how that still is, you know, the microcosm, it almost supports that kind of toxic masculinity in other, you know, outside of the club.
No doubt. I mean, and alcohol is often used as like an excuse, really, you know, an excuse. It's like a lubricant, you know, to sort of to really indulge your worst impulses that, like you said, that are connected to forms of masculinity that are toxic. But it doesn't help that that sex workers across the continuum, whether we're talking about strippers, whether we're talking about, you know, quote unquote cam girls, talking about you know, prostitutes, you know, this idea that these are women to be disrespected, or that this is work that's immoral or not to be protected. That hurts the workers. Like it allows men to kind of see them as something different from ordinary women, like, you know, if they want to like use a woman as a punching bag, or sort of take out some particularly aggressive or forceful form of sexuality on a worker that they wouldn't, you know, take out on a date or a girlfriend or a wife. This is a place where they can go and exploit or abuse. So it's, you know, the general attitudes that the society has for sex workers is actually very much to blame for why, you know, toxic men use alcohol to, you know, to sort of usher them into these behavior patterns.
Yeah. And the dynamic that takes place between men in groups of men, you know, and just kind of like playing along with the performance of it. It's like, again, like I said, I it's not my scene at all, because I don't want to be associated with men who, like you said, are mistreating women as a performance for other men. You know, it's the alpha male, you know, the one that's throwing the most tips and being the most vulgar is the one that's like the alpha male in the group, you know?
It's that it's social, it's collectivist, but sometimes it's solitary too. You know, there's a lot of solitary deviants playing out in strip clubs. So
just the man coming by himself, huh?
Absolutely.
Okay,
There's so many men coming by themselves.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. I thought it was kind of a group thing.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. And some of the literature actually has typologies of customers. That's some really important literature. I talk about that a little bit, but I focus more on the workers.
Right.
But you know, some of the men are not. I mean, like there's a whole continuum of patrons. Like they're the casual consumers that are kind of coming in for bachelor parties or for like Friday night. You know, what's the word? Debauchery, I guess. You know, people coming in for like Friday night debauchery or like, you know, part of a bachelor party or part of a party. But then there are also like regular customers, quote unquote, that identify as like friends of the club, you know, mascots of the club, you know, friends of the workers. And sometimes, and dancers benefit from cultivating these regular relationships, because some of them will come in on a particular day or a couple times a week, and they can be relied upon.
Right.
Oh, you know, my regular Jeff is coming in tonight. He comes in every other Friday night and gives me, you know, $300, you know, and so this can become, you know, a relied upon part of the economy. So some of these solitary men, they're not necessarily predatory. They're lonely. They might be aspirational. You know, they might think, if I'm just not, you know, if I'm the nice guy that comes in once a week, like maybe eventually, like we're going to get married. I'm going to get married to this stripper that I, you know, give all this money to every week, or, you know. There's quite a continuum and quite a diversity of men that go in, but you know, it's definitely a very cisgender heterosexual space, and the material culture is set up to attract that. You know, there's pool tables and beer slogans and football on, and you know, it's very much sort of set up to be a space where, like, you know, your quote average Joe you know, is comfortable, you know, just sort of sitting there and consuming the nude bodies of working women, dancing women, and drinking and socializing. A place where they can be very comfortable together or alone, you know, because, you know, there's nothing homoerotic about it, right? They're all, by virtue of the fact that they're all together in this space, you know, peeping, you know, cisgender, you know, women's bodies, you know, suggests that they're not queer, you know, they're able to sort of claim that heterosexuality. So, you know, groups work very well in this setting, as well as men coming in by themselves. For nefarious as well as non-nefarious reasons.
And so let's shift then to your discussion of how the workers themselves like engage in different kinds of drug use and the narratives they use to, you know, justify certain kinds of behaviors but demonize others.
This is, again, why the stereotypes are so damaging, you know, for all. You know, these mainstream narratives, these media images, these tropes, you know, we internalize them and then we wield them. So the same kind of drug use that's considered, you know, highly stigmatized outside of sex worker populations is considered, highly stigmatized between and among populations, like, strippers and other sex workers. So, less stigmatized forms of drug use, like smoking pot, that was actually done outside. So this, by 2006, when I was looking at the club in the post-industrial Northeast, the couple of clubs in the post-industrial Northeast, there were smoking lounges outside, and at least as commonly as smoking cigarettes, people were smoking pot.
Mm.
Could drive by and smell it. You could see it. It was not really hidden, but more stigmatized forms of drug use, like snorting cocaine or shooting heroin, would be done in private spaces with closed doors, and particular drugs would only be shared with known others. And in fact, sometimes informally that would play into the economy too. There was like a barter system that would go on. Instead of paying for a lap dance, somebody gives you some cocaine and trades cocaine for the lap dance. That was less common than money exchanges.
What about the economy with the drugs? Like, is it, because you have, say, like, the managers, the bouncers, the dancers, the clients, like, is there one group that's bringing in the drugs? Is it everyone? Like, are they selling it to each other? Is it like how does that work?
So again, and the clubs are very different. Some very strict and not. The clubs that I looked at most closely for my dissertation, it was both and all. Some customers would come in specifically because of they're actually drug dealers, and then they would find a space to sell, like in that space, to interested parties. Oftentimes it was either workers like bouncers or managers, like connecting to customers, or just customers. Sometimes, just like, again, like with other populations, like I'm thinking about college students, people who have prescriptions for things will share their prescriptions, with other folks, and you're going to use them for the same thing, whether you have a prescription for them or not. If somebody has access to prescription painkillers, they will give them to their friends, or they will, sell them. Usually give, just trading or giving, giving somebody something that you have, like dancers, giving other dancers pills.
Well, within the drug world specifically, it's a very male-dominated world. When we think about drug dealers, it's usually men, and men are more consumers also. And then when you add women into the drug consuming cultures, there's a lot of this gender roles enacted through how drugs are used and how they're sold. And so just coming from that, I'm guessing that, it would be like the bouncers or the male workers in the club, and then even secondly, the clients bringing in drugs to, like you say, trade for lap dances. But I would not expect it to be the women dancers, but also at the same time, if the women were selling drugs, that would be another revenue stream within this industry.
Yeah, I mean, very rarely did you see the money flowing toward strippers for drugs.
In your article, you mentioned you had one quote where the woman said that she would never buy drugs herself, that she expects, men to give it her some. And so, you see that kind of gender dynamic within drug cultures generally, like men give women, not a bag of drugs, but just like a hit, so that the man controls the drugs. He has it in his pocket. The woman has to ask him for another hit. And it's a way for men to control women. And so therefore, if women buy their own drugs and have their own supply, it's more independent, and they don't depend on this man to give him hit by hit. And so I was thinking in the club, like, it might be more empowering for women to have the drugs, and that they're also selling that to clients. They're also selling other services to clients. But that's not how it works, is it? Or not very often?
I mean, it's definitely a male dominated, patriarchal setting, but it's also like in this weird way, you could say chivalrous, right? It's a chivalry that drives all of this idea that, well, he's supposed to give me everything, from whether it's drugs or buy me a drink or patrons, regular patrons will buy costumes, they'll buy outfits, they'll buy heels, they'll buy boob jobs. I mean, that, like a really, really committed client, and and a career dancer.
Wow.
They might, team up and invest in breast implants. So, from small expectations, like, hey, give me, buy me a couple of beers, give me some pot, to larger expectations of like investing in my career, right? Or investing in my wardrobe, or, investing, and certainly personal, kinds of exchanges still happen, even though they're, of course, at some clubs frown upon them, like giving somebody money for their rent directly, or giving somebody money for their child's, resources, rides, giving people rides, places. This general idea that, men are going to, give you things in exchange for, these sexualized performances. And in some cases, more, sex itself, or the exchange of sex acts, for money. But oftentimes relationships. I guess it's remarkable to some people to think how much of the time, people want relationships. Like sometimes they just want sex, or, but sometimes they really just want this woman all the way. They want this woman, not be this woman's boyfriend.
I feel like there's also this, men will enact this, I'll call it a drive, but kind of like a socialized drive to provide, no matter what context. And if it's a single man who doesn't have a partner, and this offers them that opportunity to kind of have that dynamic of providing. But in the same sense, I could see where they would just escalate it to the point of like almost of dominating and feeling like a sense of ownership, over the woman who's been
like,
given.
Look at how much money I spend on you.
Right.
Like,
So
how come we haven't even had sex yet?
And now you're on the other side of the room with some other dude. I just spent
right.
hundreds of dollars.
Yeah, I could just see that jealousy just coming up, right? And just and then you got the alcohol, then you got the jealousy, and you got this, period of time where you basically feel you have this lasting relationship, even though it's within the confines of this particular space. I find that just fascinating on the part of trying to understand like the male mentality, and what, it's leading to a road that's not going to go where I think they think it's going to go,
And occasionally it does, like people in auto, but occasionally it does. And most of the time it doesn't. And women disclose at different levels, right? Like some women will have stage names, but everything else about them will be true and forthcoming. Other women will have a total separate story. Like, oh, he doesn't know how many kids I have. He doesn't know like my real, like everything about me is a lie. Like I tell him I'm 28, but I'm really 24. I tell him I'm from Missouri, but I'm really from Oklahoma. And people handle that in different ways at will, depending on how much they want to give up, for safety as well as for just their own control of the experience. But I've definitely seen men who think that they're like on the verge of like getting engaged to a person, and I'm, thinking, gosh, I know that you don't even know her real age.
Right.
I know this, because I know her, but I know that you don't even know her real age, and you think that, if you ask her to marry you, in a few more months, it's going to be a yes, probably.
Like fantasy just eventually comes crashing into the wall for many men in that scenario, I'm sure.
And so what you talk about, like there's all kinds of levels of drugs and alcohol being consumed. What were the distinctions that you made? Like you specifically talked about, the ways in which workers would justify their usage or say that my behavior is okay, but that is stigmatized or problematic.
Yeah, people would have different, so like to,
like you mentioned instrumentality.
Oh yes, like instrumental drug use. Instrumental drug use, like using for a reason, for like a good reason. Like using drugs to get through a performance or to sort of stay awake, or like anything, like taking Tylenol for a headache, right? Like it's like you have this reason to use this drug that's like socially acceptable. And there was
Thinking about that too, because you mentioned some opioid usage, and I was thinking like, well, this is a very physical job and it's a physically demanding job, and people probably have pain issues also, you know, and especially maybe that's how the opioid use starts and it grows into something different.
It's certainly how it can be justified.
Right.
You know, my back hurts, you know, give me one of those, you know, fill in the blank. And this is how it happens outside of stripper populations. Like,
Right.
that's why, you know, these are controlled substances, right? Like they have a high, you know, they're euphoria producing substances in many cases. And, you know, that becomes an addictive feeling. But there's also these norms of moderation that you find in ordinary society that came up a lot. These norms of moderation that you find in ordinary society, like quote unquote ordinary society outside of strip clubs, right? Non-stigmatized society, I guess I should say. You know, that, you know, those attitudes are also present inside of strip clubs. If you're an addict and you're doing this job because you're an addict, and this is, you know, what you're doing with your money, that's not okay. Whereas if you're just sort of using, you know, socially, you know, these are the same attitudes that, you know, we hear folks outside of strip clubs, you know, talk about, you know, drinking alone as being not acceptable, or drinking in the morning as not being acceptable, but drinking, you know, with dinner, you know, a glass or two of wine with dinner is respectable or acceptable. You know, they moved the goalposts a little bit because it's just such a drug saturated space, you know, compared to some others. So there might not be, you know, the abstinence norms, you know, around something like, you know, cocaine, like the way you would have like pure abstinence norms about that in other subcultures or contexts. But there are still these norms of moderation and this judgment, like connected to like reasoning, like why you're using drugs or why you're using a particular drug. And some women would use strategic abstinence too, you know, because they didn't want, like some women, occasionally women would report like, you know, getting intoxicated at home, but never doing it at work, you know, like that, where they were bigger sort of drinkers or drug users outside of the space.
Oh, I had a question about, you know, just how sociologists would use the term stigma management. And so outside of the club, how are the dancers talking about their work? Or I imagine a lot of the dancers have children, you know, they're probably mothers. And maybe this is a great career for, you know, having a really flexible schedule where you can manage things like childcare or just other stuff going on in your life and your caretaking roles. So, and then there's stigma management within the club, but also just in different levels of their outside life and interacting with friends or acquaintances or family, or probably they also work other jobs too. I mean, this might be more of a part-time job and they're working other jobs.
And this was super relevant when you look at like strippers like across these sort of social class brackets. And other researchers have talked about like stripper typologies, like, you know, there's the career dancer, the sort of lifetime dancer. And then there's the, I'm just working, you know, the stereotype, I'm just working my way through college, you know, dancer, you know, the sort of temporary dancer, you know, has more status than a permanent dancer because she's just sort of on her way somewhere, you know. So some of that plays in, and also with stigma management, you know, too, like what kind of family do you come from? Like, do you come from a middle class or an upper middle class family? Like, would you have to hide like a sex worker role or identity from your parents, like, or not, because you don't have parents? You know, so things like, you know, social class came up a lot in terms of how much stigma management was being enacted. Like, who can know, like, how stigmatizing is this role or identity really? You know, who you disclose it to, who you don't.
Were there any workers who like also did digital or internet-based stripping, you know, that kind of thing? Since, you know, is there anybody that revealed that they did that as well?
Maybe this time period is right before that kind of transition.
Okay, so it wasn't
ended in 2011 or so.
Okay.
With your
That's a long time ago now, really. It seems like yesterday, right? 2011, but
no, yeah, so many changes. So now it's become virtual. Like a lot of it's become virtual. A lot of it's become like they're Insta girls and like,
Yeah, this whole camming industry.
cam girls.
Yeah.
There's actually even a great horror movie that came out called, I think it's called Cam, C-A-M.
Me and my inferiority contest.
It's like any other influencer. If you think about all of the YouTube influencers out there, there are definitely like, like sex worker and stripper and porn actor, influencers now coming up certainly in 2021 but yes, Beverly's right, like by 2010, 2011, like this isn't really, of course we have the internet, we have email, we have social media, but this part, this sort of this influencer phenomenon, economic, these economic arrangements like via internet sex work, not quite as well developed.
Yeah, but I feel like it's almost like when I think of the pandemic and people's, who are losing work because the nature of their work is to be in a space, a public space where people can no longer go. I'm sure that has negatively impacted,
social distancing and masking is like the antithesis.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
To what happens in strip clubs and sort of maintaining these distances, social and physical. Probably it's not been good for business.
No.
But I imagine it's been great for virtual business.
Yeah.
I think it would give the worker a lot more control. They're getting all the money and, they're in the safety of their own home and they don't have to deal with the management or the clients, touching their bodies. But at the other hand, it's harder to come up with your own clients than at least the client provides the clients.
And then there's the technological hurdles and then, just all those things of like, really doing it all yourself. I mean, there's obviously pluses and minuses to that.
And how about you, Melissa? Do you have concluding thoughts or takeaways for what we should learn from your work?
And this is for all of my work, I like to, and like many sociologists, shed a normalizing, quote unquote, light on, things that are stigmatized or marginalized or deviantized. And to show everyone really, how, these dominant cultural scripts, play out in these microcosmic spaces, and that it's all, there's, deviance is sort of a misnomer. Mm-hmm. It's not really that deviant, these norms and these values, they're dialects, if anything, they're cultural dialects. From what we find in the sort of mainstream canonized language and culture and norms and values. Dialects, I'd call it maybe like a cultural dialect, because again, you are like, if you're in a drug saturated space or a nightlife space, there's going to be, more flexibility about, which drugs you should use or if you should use drugs at all. Maybe if you were at, your, Thanksgiving with your family or something, but nonetheless, the versions of ordinary and mainstream narratives are deployed by actors in so-called deviant or marginalized settings. And I think that's an important thing to understand, how similar and how normative it all is, rather than to kind of think of it as, to close on that word, exotic, it's not.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Melissa, for joining us.
Thank you so much. I had so much fun.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to talk to you. And we appreciate, talking about your research today.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed reading your articles. I like your writing style. I love the humanity that you bring to it and the way the narratives are. There were narratives of things that I could relate to. So, in terms of the thinking about that, and I really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. So we'll stop there.
And cut.
Great.